The hospital administrator forced my nurse wife to handle 3 patients, flatlining at once, then destroyed her career when she couldn't save everyone, so we vanished. A year later, he was taking photos of our new house. My wife, an ICU nurse of 17 years, came home extremely tipsy and beelined straight for our back garden. I smelt smoke, and when I went to check on her, I saw that she was burning her scrubs while sitting on the ground, violently sobbing. She had even burned her nursing school mementos that were worth gold to her. It took me almost 2 hours of gently holding her and asking what happened until she finally opened up. Last night at 4 a.m., the biggest emergency she had ever dealt with happened. 3 patients started coding red at once. She immediately ran to the administrator's office begging him to get 2 more nurses to help her out. But the thing was, these nurses were working on opposite wings, and our hospital was so cheap they never gave us communication devices. Getting nurses would mean the administrator himself would have to run and track them down, and clearly he wasn't bothered to do that. "You've handled worse, Sarah. You're my best nurse, and that's why I put you on the tough cases." My wife begged him, told him she physically couldn't be in 3 places at once. His response was, "We all need things. Make it work." So she ran back to the ICU and faced the impossible choice. Save the young mother in room 4, a teenager with meningitis who was seizing in room 7, or room 12, her best friend Lisa's mother, who was struggling to breathe. Lisa and my wife grew up together, and Lisa's mom was like a second mother to Sarah. She was supposed to have 2 or 3 more weeks left. Sarah chose to run to the teenager first. She got him stabilized, then sprinted to the young mother. She was bleeding internally, and the bleeding was severe, but she again managed to control it. But then it happened. By the time she made it to Lisa's mother's room, alarms were screaming, and Lisa's mother was barely conscious. Sarah started compressions immediately, but she knew it was too late. Sarah did CPR for 30 minutes, even though she knew after 5 that it was hopeless. She called time of death at 4:47 a.m., and the worst part wasn't even over. 2 new critical patients arrived before she could even clean room 12. She passed Lisa's mother's body being wheeled to the morgue and had to keep working. The administrator strolled through at 5 a.m. and saw her. He actually nodded approvingly and said, "See, I knew you could handle it." Sarah threw up in a supply closet and then went back to her other patients. And yet, it got even worse. At the 7 a.m. shift meeting, the administrator used Lisa's mother's death as a teaching moment. He stood in front of everyone and said, "We lost a patient in room 7 last night. This is what happens when nurses don't prioritize properly. You need better time management skills." Sarah broke down crying right there in front of her colleagues. The administrator's response was, "And this emotional response is exactly the problem. This kind of behavior affects team morale. Document everything properly and see me after your shift." He wrote Sarah up for emotional unprofessionalism. After Sarah opened up, she passed out intoxicated on the couch, and that's how I spent my day planning. I'm a former military medic. I know what it's like to make life and death decisions. I knew how Sarah felt, and for some lazy effing eye-hole to make my Sarah feel that way, I wasn't gonna let that slide. I drove to the hospital at midnight and parked in the administrator's reserved spot. I didn't sleep. I waited in the darkness until he showed up at 6 a.m. for his shift. He was furious about his parking spot, but when he stepped out, I did too. I walked right to him and told him we needed to talk about what he did to my wife. I honestly wanted to act in a way that would get me 25 to life, but I restrained myself. Instead, I told Mr. Cheeseburger Gut in front of me that the patient who died last night was Sarah's best friend's mother, that he literally forced my wife to choose between who lived and who died. He wasn't interested though. He tried to push past me, but sadly for Mr. Cheeseburger Gut, I stood firm. That's when he threatened to call security and report my wife for abandonment. Abandonment. He said, "That old woman was dying anyway. This is part of the job." I clenched my fists and told him to say that again. "Okay," he said. "She was gonna die anyway. Me going around chasing for a nurse who was God knows where wasn't worth it." That's when I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "I've been recording you the whole time," I said. His face went white. Full story on channel, linked below. He lunged for my phone, his wedding ring catching on my jacket and tearing the fabric. The sound of ripping cloth mixed with his heavy breathing as we struggled in the parking lot. His face had shifted from shock to calculating rage, and he hissed through clenched teeth, "Your wife called that woman through negligence. I'll make sure everyone knows it." Security guards rushed out from the hospital entrance, separating us before things escalated further. One of the guards was crying, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I recognized him from the night shift. He'd been on duty when Lisa's mother died. The administrator immediately started spinning his version, pointing at me and claiming I'd threatened him. The guards looked between us, unsure what to do. Within minutes, we were marched to the administrator's office. HR was already there, Sarah's personnel file open on the desk. My stomach dropped when I saw the dates on the papers. He'd been documenting concerns about Sarah for months, preparing for something like this. The HR representative, a woman named Catherine, kept glancing nervously between the administrator and me. They made me wait outside while the administrator went in first. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door behind me. My hands shook as I played back the recording. The wind in the parking lot had made the audio fuzzy. His worst statements were muffled, barely audible. I could make out dying anyway, but the rest was garbled by background noise and heavy breathing. Someone else was whispering in the background, but I couldn't make out who or what they were saying. I splashed water on my face and headed to the cafeteria to buy time and think. That's when I saw Lisa at the coffee machine, wearing her mother's cardigan. She still had her hospital visitor badge from last night. My chest tightened as she turned and saw me. "Oh, thank God you're here," she said, her eyes red and puffy. I wanted to thank Sarah personally, but they said she called in sick. She tried so hard to save Mom. The other nurses told me she did CPR for 30 minutes. I stood frozen, unable to tell her the truth. Lisa hugged me, and I smelled her mother's perfume on the cardigan. She was handling paperwork, she explained, dealing with the morgue and funeral arrangements. I mumbled something about Sarah needing rest, and escaped as quickly as I could. My phone buzzed. Sarah was calling, her voice confused and groggy. "Where are you? Why didn't you wake me? I had the strangest dream about telling you something about Lisa's mom." She didn't remember. The alcohol and trauma had created gaps in her memory. I sat in my car, trying to decide whether to tell her about the confrontation while she was still vulnerable. Before I could answer, she gasped, oh God, it wasn't a dream. Lisa's mother. I couldn't save her. I heard her running to the bathroom, retching. I started the car to head home when the administrator appeared at my driver's side window, knocking with his class ring. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. He held up termination papers. "Delete the recording," he said. "Delete it now, and Sarah keeps her job. I'll even write her a glowing recommendation. She'll never have to know about this conversation." I stared at the papers. Sarah's name was typed at the top. The reason for termination listed as patient abandonment resulting in death. "You have 10 seconds to decide, he said. I drove away without answering, leaving him standing in the parking lot. At a gas station a few blocks away, I noticed a car had followed me. A nurse got out, someone I'd seen around but never met. She glanced around nervously before approaching. I was in the staff meeting, she whispered. When he blamed the wrong room number, I recorded it on my phone. We all do it for meeting notes, phones hidden in our laps. I have his whole speech about room 7 when the patient was in room 12. She showed me her phone, hands trembling. The video was clear, the administrator's voice distinct, but she was terrified of retaliation. I have 2 kids. I can't lose this job, but what he did to Sarah. She transferred the file to my phone and drove away before I could thank her. When I got home, Sarah was in the backyard again, poking at the ashes from her burned scrubs. A piece of fabric had survived. Room 12 partially visible on the melted badge. She picked it up and started sobbing again. I held her, still not telling her about the morning's events. An hour later, I convinced her to rest and drove to Lisa's house to pay respects. The administrator's car was in the driveway. Through the window, I could see him handing Lisa an envelope. When I knocked, Lisa answered with tears streaming down her face. The hospital sent a representative, she said, gesturing to the administrator. They brought a $5,000 bereavement fund check. Isn't that thoughtful? The administrator smiled at me over Lisa's shoulder. We take care of our families here, he said, though some nurses handle these situations better than others. I was just explaining to Lisa how these critical moments require split-second decisions. Some nurses make the right choices. Others, well, Lisa's face changed, confusion mixing with her grief. What do you mean? Nothing to concern yourself with, the administrator said smoothly. Just know that we're investigating to ensure this never happens again. I left before I did something I'd regret, but the damage was done. By evening, Sarah's antidepressant prescription was denied at the pharmacy drive-thru. The pharmacist mentioned an employment verification issue from the hospital. Without insurance, the medication would cost $400. I sat in my home office reviewing both recordings. The administrator clearly said room 7 in the staff meeting, but the teenager had been in room 7. Lisa's mother was in room 12. His mistake seemed deliberate, shifting blame to the wrong room to confuse the narrative. The next morning, I met the night janitor at a local diner. He'd reached out through the nurse, terrified but needing to talk. He'd seen the administrator in the ICU at 3:45 a.m. before the crisis started. He was looking at the patient boards, the janitor said in accented English. I thought it was strange. Administrators never come that early. He glanced around nervously. He knows I'm undocumented. My whole family depends on this job. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Sarah was driving and I could hear she was crying. I'm going to the hospital. I need to get my things. I need to talk to him. I threw money on the table and ran to my car. I found her in the employee parking lot, still wearing yesterday's clothes. She hadn't showered or eaten. She was clutching printed emails between her and Lisa's mother about lunch plans they'd made for next week. I chose wrong, she kept saying. I should have saved her first. She trusted me. I held her as she broke down completely. Her blood pressure was visibly affecting her, face flushed and hands shaking. I drove her to urgent care, where she collapsed from dehydration and exhaustion. The nurse recognized her from the hospital, and I had to lie about her condition to prevent a psychiatric hold. That evening, Lisa showed up at our house with her mother's medical chart. The administrator had given her full transparency. The chart showed Sarah entered room 12 last. Lisa demanded to know why. Your wife chose to let my mother die, Lisa said, her voice rising. She saved strangers instead of the woman who helped raise her. The confrontation spilled into our front yard. Neighbors gathered, some recording on their phones as Lisa shouted about Sarah choosing to let her mother die. I realized the administrator had orchestrated this, turning Lisa's grief into a weapon. The next day, Lisa filed a complaint at the police station about Sarah's negligence. The desk sergeant mentioned the administrator had already called about an incident pattern. They had to investigate any death-related complaint, even if prosecution was unlikely. Our attorney reviewed the recordings in his office, then delivered bad news. We lived in a 2-party consent state. Using the recording could lead to my arrest for illegal wiretapping, not the administrator's. Sarah's colleague texted urgently. The administrator had announced Sarah's indefinite suspension at the staff meeting, framing it as protecting staff from an unstable colleague. The text message included a photo of the meeting room whiteboard with Sarah, unstable, written in red marker. My hands clenched around the phone as I showed it to our attorney. He shook his head, explaining that workplace defamation was nearly impossible to prove without damages beyond termination. Sarah discovered the social media post that night. Lisa had uploaded a photo of her mother with the caption, "Killed by negligent nurse Sarah, last name, who chose to save others first." The post had 847 shares in 2 hours. Comments ranged from sympathy to death threats. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through messages from former colleagues distancing themselves. The next morning, our bank called about suspicious activity on our joint account. The manager mentioned a concerned call about my threatening behavior at the hospital. They'd frozen our accounts pending investigation. I drove to the branch immediately, but the damage was done. Bills were already bouncing. Sarah's pastor called to cancel their counseling appointment. His secretary whispered that the administrator served on the church board and had expressed concerns about the situation. Even our spiritual support system was compromised. Sarah sat in the kitchen, staring at her coffee, isolated from every community that once sustained her. I discovered our car tires slashed when I went to buy groceries. Security footage showed a teenager wearing a memorial t-shirt with Lisa's mother's photo. The vandalism was spreading beyond angry words. I changed the tire myself, knowing police wouldn't prioritize property damage amid everything else. The insurance company called that afternoon. Sarah's coverage was terminated effective immediately due to termination for cause. The representative explained that continuation coverage wasn't available in such cases. Her antidepressants would now cost $400 monthly. I calculated our savings against mounting expenses and felt my chest tighten. Our neighbor knocked on the door at dinner time. She'd seen the administrator at our mailbox at 5 a.m. Her description of his car was precise. He'd been there before dawn, doing something with our mail. I checked the box and found nothing unusual, but the violation of boundaries was escalating. I paid cash for Sarah's medication at CVS. The pharmacist slipped me a note with my receipt. He asked about all her prescriptions yesterday. My jaw clenched as I realized the administrator was gathering ammunition, looking for anything to use against us. The pharmacist's worried expression told me she'd said too much already. Sarah found the termination letter in our mail the next day. The document was dated 3 days before Lisa's mother died. The administrator had pre-planned this, setting Sarah up to fail. She stared at the date, understanding dawning in her eyes. This wasn't about the tragedy. This was calculated destruction. I followed the administrator to the hospital parking garage that evening. Through his car window, I heard him on the phone. The husband's a problem, but I know his military history. PTSD, anger issues. We can use that. He was researching my background, looking for leverage. I backed away before he noticed me. Police arrived at our house with a restraining order the following morning. The order included both of us, citing Sarah's unstable behavior and my threatening conduct. We couldn't go within 500 feet of the hospital. Sarah couldn't even retrieve her personal belongings from her locker. The officer seemed apologetic but firm. Sarah's best friend from nursing school called, voice strained. Her daughter was Lisa's goddaughter. She couldn't see us anymore, couldn't risk taking sides. The support network Sarah had built over 17 years crumbled with each phone call. Isolation tightened around us like a noose. Death threats started appearing in our mailbox. Anonymous notes describing what should happen to murderer nurses. I installed security cameras, but the damage to Sarah's psyche was evident. She stopped eating, stopped showering, moved through our house like a ghost. The administrator's psychological warfare was working. We checked into a motel when rocks came through our living room window. The clerk mentioned someone had called asking if we'd registered. Even in hiding, the administrator tracked our movements through his network. Sarah sat on the motel bed, knees drawn to her chest, smaller than I'd ever seen her. A night nurse from the hospital texted me to meet at a truck stop diner. She'd been working the opposite wing during the crisis. Her hands shook as she revealed she'd been in the administrator's office when Sarah begged for help. She'd heard him clearly say, "Let the old woman go. She's costing us too much anyway." The nurse showed me her phone. She'd recorded the conversation for her own protection, a habit developed after previous administrators had thrown staff under buses. The audio was clear, damning, but she had a work visa, 2 kids. The administrator controlled her future. She transferred the file and left quickly. Driving back to the motel, I noticed the administrator's car in my rearview mirror. He followed aggressively, swerving between lanes. His controlled facade was cracking. The emergence of an unknown witness had shifted the game. I pulled into the police station parking lot, forcing him to drive past. Inside the station, the administrator was already there, filing a complaint about harassment. He claimed I'd been stalking him, threatening his safety. The desk sergeant looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. Neither of us could prove our claims in that moment. The night nurse called, panicking. She'd received a text from the administrator. "Remember your visa status. We need to discuss your future at the hospital." The threat was clear. She was wavering, reconsidering her offer to help. I couldn't blame her. The administrator held too many lives in his hands. An emergency hospital board meeting was called. Sarah wasn't invited, but news traveled fast. The administrator was painting himself as a victim of a vengeful employee and her unstable husband. Board members who'd known Sarah for years were being told she'd snapped under pressure, become dangerous. The district attorney's office finally agreed to review the case. The prosecutor examined the evidence, particularly the nurse's recording. The administrator's words about letting the old woman go suggested administrative decisions that directly caused death, but prosecution would be complex, requiring proof of intent beyond negligence. The administrator's lawyer arrived at the motel with a settlement offer: sign a non-disclosure agreement, accept a modest payout, and leave town. The alternative was years of legal battles we couldn't afford. Sarah looked at the papers with dead eyes. The man who'd destroyed her was offering to pay her to disappear. I met with the night janitor again. He'd found something in the trash from the administrator's office, a staffing chart from the night before the crisis. 3 nurses had been scheduled for the ICU. The administrator had personally crossed 2 names out, reassigning them to save overtime costs. He'd created the deadly situation intentionally. The janitor's hands trembled as he gave me the document. His family's entire future depended on his hospital job. The administrator knew about his immigration status, held it over him like a sword, but he couldn't live with what he'd seen anymore. Heroes come in unexpected forms. Sarah attempted to meet Lisa at a coffee shop to explain everything. Lisa arrived with 2 friends, creating a public confrontation. She threw the medical chart on the table, demanding Sarah explain why her mother died last. The coffee shop patron stared as Lisa's grief exploded into accusations. Sarah fled to the bathroom, vomiting from stress. The administrator appeared at the coffee shop as if by coincidence. He comforted Lisa, playing the compassionate leader while shooting glances at Sarah through the bathroom door. Every move was calculated, every interaction designed to deepen wounds. He turned Lisa into a weapon against her mother's best friend. Our attorney called with mixed news. The evidence was compelling but complex. The administrator's decision to deny help could constitute negligent homicide, but proving it required witnesses willing to testify. Everyone who could help had something to lose. The case would hinge on courage versus self-preservation. Sarah's nursing license was under review. The board had received multiple complaints, all traced back to the administrator's network. Even if criminal charges didn't stick, her career hung by a thread. 17 years of dedication reduced to defending herself against orchestrated lies. The hospital's PR department released a statement about recent incidents and their commitment to patient safety. Sarah wasn't named, but anyone following local social media knew. The narrative was set, a nurse had failed, and the hospital was taking action. The administrator positioned himself as the solution to a problem he'd created. I found Sarah in the motel bathroom at 3 a.m., holding her bottle of antidepressants. She wasn't planning anything, just staring at the pills that represented her unraveling stability. I held her while she sobbed about failing Lisa's mother, about choosing wrong, about the impossibility of saving everyone when the system was designed for failure. The next morning brought a breakthrough. The administrator's son appeared at our motel, visibly distressed. He'd overheard his father at dinner complaining about the old woman's expensive care weeks before she died. His conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. Sometimes the apple does fall far from the tree. The son's willingness to testify changed everything. The prosecutor moved forward with charges of negligent homicide. The administrator's careful construction began crumbling. Hospital board members distanced themselves. The narrative shifted from a nurse's failure to an administrator's deadly cost-cutting. But the administrator wasn't finished. New social media accounts appeared, spreading rumors about Sarah's history of instability. Photos from the night she burned her scrub surfaced, taken by someone who'd been watching our house. The psychological warfare intensified even as legal walls closed in. The night nurse finally agreed to testify after the administrator threatened her children's school enrollment. She realized he'd destroy her either way. Her courage inspired others. The janitor stepped forward with the staffing charts. A cascade of witnesses emerged from the shadows of fear. Lisa began questioning the narrative she'd been fed. The medical chart showed impossible timing. No nurse could have saved all 3 patients under those conditions. Her grief remained, but doubt crept in about who truly bore responsibility for her mother's death. The administrator's manipulation was unraveling. Sarah received a call from a hospital 2 hours away. They'd heard about her situation through nursing networks. They offered her a position with proper staffing ratios and supportive administration. Light appeared at the end of our tunnel. Not all healthcare systems were broken beyond repair. The administrator made one final attempt at control. He arrived at the motel at midnight, demanding we meet. His composure had shattered completely. He ranted about ungrateful nurses, about sacrifices he'd made, about the unfairness of being blamed for business decisions. The real man emerged from behind the calculated facade. I recorded his entire breakdown. In a two-party consent state, the recording was useless as evidence, but it revealed the truth of who he was. A man who viewed nurses as expendable resources, patients as financial burdens, and human life as numbers on a spreadsheet. His rant included admissions that sealed his fate. The prosecutor played the night nurse's original recording at the preliminary hearing. The administrator's voice filled the courtroom. Let the old woman go. She's costing us too much anyway. Lisa sat in the gallery, her face crumbling as she understood the truth. Her mother hadn't died because Sarah chose wrong. She died because the administrator chose profits. Plea negotiations began immediately. The administrator's lawyer recognized the impossibility of defending those words to a jury. Hospital administrators across the state watched nervously. The case set precedent for administrative accountability in understaffing decisions. Cost-cutting that endangered lives could now lead to criminal charges. The administrator accepted a plea deal for criminally negligent homicide, 18 months in prison, loss of his administrative license, and prohibition from healthcare management. It wasn't enough for a life lost, but it was more than most administrators faced for deadly decisions. Justice came in imperfect portions. Sarah met Lisa one last time before we left town. They sat in the hospital memorial garden, both crying for different reasons. Lisa apologized for the social media posts, for the accusations, for being manipulated in her grief. Sarah held her, both women victims of a system that prioritized profits over people. The morning we packed to leave, neighbors who'd been silent began approaching. They'd been afraid to support us publicly, but wanted us to know they understood. The administrator's arrest had freed them from fear. Community sometimes returns when courage defeats intimidation. Sarah's hands steadied as she packed her new scrubs for the new hospital. The tremor that had developed during our ordeal faded. She wasn't the same nurse who'd burned her uniforms in our backyard. That innocence was gone, but something stronger had emerged from the ashes. I drove past the hospital one last time. The administrator's reserved parking spot was empty. New policies were already being implemented. Minimum staffing ratios, communication devices for all nurses. Lisa's mother's death had forced changes that would save future lives. Sometimes tragedy creates transformation. The investigation revealed 14 other incidents where the administrator's cost-cutting had endangered patients. Families came forward with stories of preventable deaths and near misses. His 18 months in prison seemed lighter with each revelation, but the system that created him remained largely intact. Sarah started at her new hospital with transparency about our story. Her colleagues embraced her, understanding the impossible position she'd been forced into. The nursing community had followed our ordeal online. She became an inadvertent symbol of what nurses faced when administrators valued budgets over bed rails. 3 months into her new position, Sarah called me from work, voice lighter than I'd heard in months. She'd managed a critical situation with proper support, saving all her patients because she had adequate resources. The contrast illuminated how preventable Lisa's mother's death had been. Proper staffing wasn't expensive. It was essential. The administrator served 12 months of his 18-month sentence. Good behavior and overcrowding earned him early release. He moved to another state, barred from healthcare but not from business. Sarah tracked his LinkedIn profile, watching him rebuild in a different industry. Some people never truly pay for their choices. Lisa sent a Christmas card with a note of forgiveness and understanding. She'd started advocating for nurse-to-patient ratios in her mother's memory. Grief had transformed into purpose. The friendship with Sarah couldn't be rebuilt, but mutual respect emerged from shared trauma. Both women carried scars that would never fully heal. The administrator's early release hit us through a Google alert Sarah had set up. 12 months instead of 18. I watched her jaw tighten as she read the notification at our new kitchen table. She closed her laptop and went to prepare for her shift without saying a word. That afternoon, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photo, Sarah entering our new hospital, taken from across the street. The message was clear. The administrator knew where we'd relocated. My hands shook as I installed new security cameras, checking angles from every window. Sarah's supervisor called her into his office the next morning. Someone had sent an anonymous email detailing the incident at her previous hospital. The supervisor, a former ICU nurse himself, printed the email and handed it to Sarah. I know what really happened, he said. This changes nothing about your employment here. The relief on Sarah's face lasted exactly 3 hours. Lisa called the hospital directly, demanding to speak with Sarah's supervisor about her mother's death. The receptionist transferred the call to administration. By lunch, rumors were spreading through the nursing staff about Sarah's past. I found Sarah in the hospital parking garage during her break, sitting in her car with her head against the steering wheel. She showed me her phone. 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The administrator's network was reactivating, reaching into our new life with surgical precision. Our new neighbor mentioned seeing a man taking photos of our house from his car. The description matched the administrator perfectly. He'd driven 2 hours to surveil us, documenting our routines. I filed a police report, but without proof of harassment, they couldn't act on suspicions alone. Sarah's first performance review came early. Her supervisor called it routine, but we both knew the truth. The anonymous complaints had triggered administrative scrutiny. Despite flawless patient care and colleague testimonials, she was placed on probationary status, pending further evaluation. The administrator's shadow stretched across state lines. I started sleeping in shifts, watching the security cameras while Sarah worked nights. The fourth night, I saw him. The administrator sat in a rental car 3 houses down, just outside the range of streetlights. He stayed for 2 hours, engine running, before driving away. The breaking point came when Sarah received a subpoena. The administrator was suing for defamation, claiming our false accusations had destroyed his career. The lawsuit sought damages exceeding our net worth. He'd found a way to continue his assault through the legal system. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the legal documents. The lawsuit named specific statements from the criminal trial, claiming they were malicious lies. He wanted depositions from everyone who'd testified against him. The night nurse, the janitor. He was dragging them all back into his web. Our new attorney, a friend of Sarah's supervisor, reviewed the case with growing concern. The administrator had hired an aggressive firm known for grinding opponents into submission through legal costs. Even if we won, the defense would bankrupt us. The system that had briefly held him accountable now served as his weapon. I drove to the administrator's new city, needing to understand what we were facing. His LinkedIn showed he'd started a healthcare consulting firm. The irony burned. He was teaching other administrators how to optimize staffing. I sat in my car outside his office building, watching him through the glass lobby. He looked different. Prison had aged him, but there was something else. A hardness in his movements, a calculating awareness of his surroundings. When he spotted my car, he didn't react with surprise. He smiled and waved, then made a phone call while maintaining eye contact. 20 minutes later, police surrounded my vehicle. The administrator had reported a stalker with a history of violence. I spent 6 hours in custody, explaining why I was 200 miles from home, parked outside his workplace. They released me with a warning about harassment. The drive home gave me time to think. The administrator wasn't just seeking revenge. He was demonstrating his power. Every move calculated to show us he could reach into our lives whenever he chose. The legal system, meant to protect victims, had become his tool of persecution. Sarah was waiting when I got home, her face drawn with exhaustion. She'd been called into another meeting. A patient's family had received an anonymous letter about her history of negligence. The family demanded a different nurse. Sarah's supervisor supported her, but the damage was spreading. That night, we sat at our kitchen table with bank statements spread before us. Legal fees were draining our savings. Sarah's probationary status meant reduced hours. The administrator didn't need to win his lawsuit. He just needed to bleed us dry fighting it. Sarah's phone rang at 3 a.m. Lisa's voice was slurred, emotional. She'd been drinking, wrestling with guilt and grief. She apologized for the lawsuit, explained the administrator had convinced her to support his defamation claim, but she couldn't do it anymore. She was withdrawing her support. The next morning, Lisa sent a notarized statement recanting her support for the administrator's lawsuit. She detailed how he'd manipulated her grief, fed her false narratives about Sarah's actions. Her withdrawal weakened his case significantly, but his lawyers pressed forward anyway. I met with a night nurse at a rest stop between our cities. She was terrified of being deposed, of the administrator discovering her new workplace. Her children had started having nightmares about being deported. She handed me a flash drive with every recording she'd made during her employment. The files revealed a pattern spanning years. The administrator's voice, captured in dozens of meetings, discussing patients as financial liabilities, comments about clearing beds and managing losses. Sarah's case wasn't isolated. It was his standard operating procedure. Our attorney's eyes widened as he reviewed the recordings. This changed everything. The defamation suit would expose the administrator to discovery. His pattern of behavior would become public record. We could countersue for malicious prosecution, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The administrator's lawyers requested an urgent meeting. Their client, they explained, was willing to drop the lawsuit in exchange for a mutual non-disclosure agreement. No admission of wrongdoing, no financial settlement, just silence. They'd miscalculated, assuming we had no ammunition. Sarah refused immediately. The administrator had taken too much. Lisa's mother, her career, her peace of mind. She wouldn't give him her voice too. Our attorney prepared the countersuit while the administrator's team scrambled to limit their client's exposure. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Sarah dressed carefully in her best suit, hands steady for the first time in months. But when we arrived at the law office, the administrator's chair was empty. His lawyers announced he'd been hospitalized for chest pains. It was a delay tactic, but it worked. The deposition was rescheduled, then postponed again when the administrator claimed ongoing cardiac issues. Each delay cost us money, time, emotional energy. Sarah's probationary period at the hospital extended with each missed court date. 3 months into the legal battle, the administrator made a mistake. He sent an email directly to Sarah's hospital administrator from his personal account. The message was carefully worded, expressing concern about patient safety given Sarah's documented history, but he'd revealed his active interference. Sarah's hospital administrator forwarded the email to our attorney. It demonstrated ongoing harassment, violation of the restraining order from the criminal case. The administrator had handed us evidence of his continued campaign. His need for control had overridden his caution. The judge in our countersuit case wasn't sympathetic to the administrator's medical delays. She ordered an independent medical examination. The results were predictable. The administrator was healthy enough to attend deposition. No more postponements would be granted. I watched the administrator enter the deposition room, his confidence visibly shaken. Months of legal maneuvering had cost him too. His consulting firm was struggling. Potential clients Googling his name found news articles about the negligent homicide conviction. His attempt to destroy Sarah was destroying him. Sarah testified for 4 hours, recounting not just the night Lisa's mother died, but the months of harassment that followed. She produced printed emails, security footage, phone records. The administrator's lawyers objected repeatedly, but the evidence was overwhelming. Their client had stalked, harassed, and attempted to destroy a witness from his criminal case. The administrator's deposition was scheduled for the following week, but he never appeared. His lawyers filed a motion to dismiss his own lawsuit, accepting liability for our legal fees. The sudden capitulation felt hollow. He'd already cost us thousands in fees, months of anguish, Sarah's reputation at her new job. 2 days later, news broke that the administrator had been arrested in another state. He'd been caught falsifying credentials to obtain a hospital administrative position. The background check had revealed his healthcare prohibition. Facing fraud charges, his house of cards was collapsing. Sarah worked her shift the night we heard about his arrest. I waited in the parking lot to drive her home, a habit born from months of fear. She emerged at 7 a.m., tired but walking taller. Word had spread through the hospital. Her colleagues understood now what she'd been facing. The fraud trial moved quickly. The administrator pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence. 2 years in state prison. No possibility of early release. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked smaller than I remembered. The man who'd wielded such terrible power was just another criminal in an orange jumpsuit. Sarah's probationary status was lifted the following month. Her supervisor apologized for the scrutiny, acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances. The other nurses, who'd kept professional distance during the uncertainty, began including her in their coffee runs and shift gatherings. Lisa reached out through a mutual friend, asking if Sarah would meet her. They sat in a park equidistant from both their homes, 2 women forever linked by tragedy. Lisa was in therapy, working through her grief and guilt. She spoke about her mother's final weeks, the conversations they'd had about Sarah's dedication. Mom knew the hospital was understaffed, Lisa said quietly. She used to worry about you burning out. She'd be horrified at what he did to you after. The sentence hung unfinished between them. The meeting was brief, too painful for extended conversation. But something shifted. Lisa began advocating publicly for safe staffing ratios, sharing her mother's story at legislative hearings. She never mentioned Sarah by name, but the truth was there for those who knew where to look. The administrator's consulting firm folded while he was in prison. His former clients distanced themselves from his methods. Several hospitals that had hired him for efficiency optimization reversed his staffing cuts. Market forces accomplished what regulations hadn't. His approach became toxic to association. I returned to work myself, having spent months focused on protecting Sarah. The normalcy felt strange after living in crisis mode. But bills needed paying. Life needed living. We couldn't let the administrator steal our future along with our past. Sarah received a letter from the night nurse. She'd gotten her green card, no longer vulnerable to deportation threats. She thanked Sarah for standing up to the administrator, for showing her that courage was possible. She was working at a better hospital now, one that valued nurses over numbers. The janitor sent a Christmas card with a photo of his family. His son had graduated high school, first in the family to do so. He wrote that testifying had been the scariest and proudest moment of his life. Sometimes doing right costs everything, but silence costs more. 6 months after the administrator's second conviction, Sarah worked a code blue that mirrored that terrible night. 3 patients crashing simultaneously, but this time, she had support. 2 nurses responded to her call, working seamlessly as a team. All 3 patients survived. She called me from the break room afterward, voice steady but emotional. She'd proven to herself that the tragedy wasn't her failure. Given proper resources, she could handle anything. The administrator had tried to break her by making her doubt her abilities. He'd failed. We drove past our old house one Sunday, curious about who lived there now. A young family had moved in, children's toys scattered on the lawn we'd once fled in fear. The neighborhood looked peaceful, no trace of the terror we'd experienced. Places heal faster than people. The administrator would serve his full sentence this time. No early release, no good behavior reduction. He'd spend 2 years contemplating how his need for control had cost him everything, but we wouldn't spend those years thinking about him. We had lives to rebuild, futures to create. Sarah's steadiness returned gradually. She stopped checking locks obsessively, stopped startling at unexpected knocks. The hypervigilance faded as months passed without incident. We were learning to live without fear again, reclaiming the peace he'd stolen. At the 1-year anniversary of starting her new position, Sarah received an award for excellence in critical care. Standing at the podium, she thanked her colleagues for their support and teamwork. She didn't mention the journey that brought her there. That story lived in the past now. I sat in the audience, remembering the woman who'd burned her scrubs in our backyard. That person felt like a stranger now. Sarah had transformed her trauma into purpose, her pain into compassion for struggling colleagues. The administrator had tried to destroy a nurse. He'd created an advocate. The drive home was quiet, comfortable. We'd survived the unsurvivable, emerged scarred but whole. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients, new possibilities. But tonight, we were just 2 people who'd weathered a storm together. Sarah hung her award in our home office next to her nursing degree. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. She'd been tested by someone who saw nurses as expendable resources. She'd proven that dedication couldn't be burned away, that compassion survived even coordinated cruelty. The coffee pot gurgled the next morning as Sarah prepared for another shift. She moved through her routine with practiced efficiency, checking her supplies, reviewing her assignments. An ordinary nurse heading to an ordinary day. The administrator had failed to make her extraordinary tragedy define her. I watched her drive away, no longer fearing who might be watching back. The security cameras remained but gathered dust. The hypervigilance had faded into normal caution. We'd found our way back to regular life, where the biggest concern was remembering to buy milk. Sarah texted me during her lunch break, a simple message about a difficult patient who'd thanked her for her patience. No crisis, no drama, just the daily rewards of good nursing. These small moments were her victory over everything the administrator had tried to steal. The sunset painted our kitchen orange as I prepared dinner. Sarah would be home soon, tired but fulfilled from another shift. We'd eat together, maybe watch something mindless on TV. The profound ordinary of a life reclaimed from chaos. Her car pulled into the driveway at 7:47 p.m. She emerged, stretching, gathering her bags, moving with the easy fatigue of honest work. No checking shadows, no scanning for threats. Just a nurse coming home after helping people heal. We sat across from each other at dinner, sharing the mundane details of our days. Her patient who'd finally been discharged after weeks in the ICU. My presentation that had gone better than expected. Normal problems, normal victories, the life we'd fought to keep.